hearty congratulations to the winner of the Absa Professional Excellence Award, Tony Leon.
My big chance came in 1989 when Helen Suzman retired as the MP for Houghton after 36 years of exemplary service. And I was nominated as the Democratic Party candidate, and I won election. My first day in Parliament was when F.W. de Klerk made his famous 2 February 1990 speech.
The prohibition of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party and a number of subsidiary organizations is being rescinded.
There's Mr. Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa.
I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony.
I was then thrust into helping to negotiate a new South Africa.
As they waited to cast a ballot in that first free and fair election, an irreversible transition set in motion.
In 1997, Nelson Mandela invited me to an early morning breakfast at his home. He offered me a seat in his cabinet, but I realized if I'd accepted the offer, it would have been the death of parliamentary opposition.
The Democratic Alliance will always ensure South Africa never becomes ever, not a single time, a one-party state under a dictator.
I've always believed that life, or my life anyway, is divided into a series of missions. And you start a mission, you have a compass or a navigation guide. When you complete it, you must move on to another mission. Maybe that's why at the age of 50 I left politics.
I am stepping down because I have done what I set out to do by my country and by my party.
I was very fortunate to be awarded a fellowship to Harvard University and then the Cato Institution in Washington, D.C. And when I came back, it was 2009, I had parliamentary elections, and afterwards, Jacob Zuma got hold of me. He said it's important for non-ANC faces to represent the country in the world. And I was sent as ambassador to Argentina and surrounding countries, and it was very absorbing. And in very poor Spanish, I set about changing the terms of trade, increasing the public footprint of South Africa there, and it was a very interesting experience.
It's official, the ANC has lost majority. Now they will have to cobble together a coalition government.
I was asked by the DA leader to be one of their 6 negotiators on this government of national unity. I wasn't looking for a role, but I was asked to perform it. And I just felt this was too important in terms of the national future to sit it out. And so for 5 or 6 weeks, I was immersed in the front line of those, often hairy negotiations with the ANC. I brought a lot of experience from the previous round of negotiations. What went wrong in the first government of national unity, which I wasn't part of, but F.W. de Klerk was, and I'd spent many years afterwards talking to de Klerk about his experiences of what went wrong in that GNU, and to try and avoid that happening this time round. It was difficult because you've got 2 opposing forces from across 30 years of division, enmity, fairly strong dislike in some cases, and they're having to come together not because they wanted to, but because the election results demand it, and particularly because the alternative, just outside the door, and still there incidentally, was the mass populist, racist, divisive EFF and MK. So if the DA couldn't get the terms right to enter the government, the EFF and MK would likely have become the government with the ANC. And I think that is really, to quote an apartheid prime minister that's still relevant today, an alternative too ghastly to contemplate.
The African National Congress has confirmed that a total of 10 political parties now constitute the government of national unity.
We have to hope that at least the architecture is better this time in 2024 than it was in 1994. But it obviously depends on the human factor. I'm on my 6th book now. It's going to be a book of war stories called Being There. The one before was called Future Tense, Reflections on My Troubled Land. And I live a very engaged life. I do a lot of lecturing here and abroad. I try also do NPO work, so help out non-governmental organizations, mentor younger people with some ideas of my own as to what their careers might become. I'm very fortunate, privileged, honored to have lived an engaged life and to have been able to do so in the country of my birth.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Howard Sackstein, Jewish Report, Absa Bank, of course. First of all, let me tell you, I'm very proud and privileged to be here. If I told you I was humbled, you probably wouldn't believe it. In fact, my illustrious predecessor, Helen Suzman, as MP for Houghton, was about 20 years ago honored by the South African Jewish Museum by the late, great Mendel Kaplan. And we went to the opening of the Helen Suzman exhibition. And her opening remarks in typical Helen style was to say, "What took you so long?" But I've got to say this, because I fought a few elections in my time. This wasn't really a fight, but after my very good friend Georgina Jaffe, who's here tonight, nominated me unexpectedly for this award and I accepted, I thought, well, I've won a few elections and I don't know if I'll win this or not. But then I looked at the other candidates, so this is a far more competitive field than any I faced in politics. And then I looked at the electorate, and I thought, wow, this is by far a much more critical electorate than any I had to go before. So double thanks, both to the other candidates and to all of you. Well, I don't want to repeat what you saw there. I've had a very public life. It still goes on for a long time. I want to say something, because I don't do this very often, because I'm usually in other forums and contexts. I want to say a bit about this Jewish community. In fact, there are so many of you here tonight, I didn't know the Jewish community of South Africa was still so large. And I'm not going to repeat what my grandpa Jack said on going to the Killarney shopping center in 1969. He said, "Good heavens, Tony, there are more Jews than people here." But I'm the poor man's Nick Rabinowitz, although a neighbor of his in Constantia. Bill Clinton, who popped up in that video, when he came to Parliament in 1997, he had a little local difficulty in Washington called Monica Lewinsky. And he spent a long time traveling through Africa as president with Hillary and the whole entourage. And he had this tea party in Parliament with all the opposition leaders, quite unusual. Everyone, wants, of course, to tug Mandela's forelock, understandably, but to meet the opposition, not so usual. And Clinton had this unbelievable charisma. Yeah, he couldn't stand again 2 weeks ago. And what he did was he turned around to General Viljoen, who at the time was head of the Freedom Front, and Viljoen was complaining to Clinton about how difficult and bad things were in South Africa. 1997, mind you. And President Clinton turned to General Viljoen and the rest of us, said, General, I'm sure you're right, but I think South Africa's fantastic. Not because of what you've got now and the problems you have, but because of what you've come from. That makes you fantastic. And it is the truth, as I said in my interview here, the alternative. So this government that we've put together, difficult as it is so much better than the alternative, which is still outside the door. But this community, wow, and Howard did a fantastic job earlier tonight. I was thinking about Clinton's predecessor as I was sitting here, George H.W. Bush. When he was nominated as Republican presidential candidate in 1988, he made an amazingly good speech at the convention, and he said, America, with its civic society organizations, is like 1,000 points of light in a broad and peaceful sky. And I was thinking about the 1,000 points of light of this community and this magnificent alphabet soup, from the CSO to the JNF to the WITSO, Maccabi, SA, ZF, SA, JBE, UOS, IUA, UCF, SAU, PJ, blah, blah. Go right down. Saujas, Telfed, Bethden, Chevra, UJS. And then I've got to say, another alphabet soup entered the melange, and that my wife and her friend Georgina and a few others, after the 7th of October, started one called WAXA, which was a women's action campaign of South Africa to expose and to highlight the gender-based violence that happened in Israel on the 6th of October. And you know, on the 6th of October, the 7th, sorry, but no, I know what I'm talking about, yes. On the 6th of October, my wife and I could not be further away from South Africa, Israel. We were in Kyoto. And if you'd have put a gun to my head on that day, the 6th of October, and said, well, you must identify yourself according to, who you are, I would have said, I'm South Africa. Then maybe I would have said I'm white, because the ANC still likes to classify us racially. And third, I probably would have said Jewish. But on the 7th of October, with that mass slaughter of Jews, whether they were Likud Jews, whether they were far-left socialist Jews, whether they hated Bibi or liked Bibi, they were killed for being Jews. For a lot of people, and I put myself here, one's identity switched to being a Jewish white South African. And that happened because of those events which we live with the consequences now. And I do need to let you into a little secret about our government, which is now a bit bigger than it was. Whether it's better, you can judge. Is the South African government is a Zionist government. Yes, you might laugh. Because the South African government actually believes in a two-state solution, in theory. And if you believe in the two-state solution, one of those states is the Jewish state. And at the conference 30 years ago when I met my wife, Michal, in Israel, though she was organizing, it wasn't on the agenda that, the organizer would land up with one of the delegates, but so it came to pass. There was this extraordinary chap called Bernard Lewis, famous Orientalist, and then, looked about 80, but he lived for another 20 years. And Bernard Lewis said something I'd just like to share with you, because I think in any dilemma, in any crisis, in any confrontation you have, and we have a lot of them right now, this community here and in the wider world, it helps a great deal to have moral clarity. And Bernard Lewis's moral clarity all those years ago, 25, 30 years ago, was the following. He said, what is this conflict about? Is it about the size of Israel, or is it about the existence of Israel? If it's about borders, it is not easy, but it is possible to solve. But if the issue is the existence of Israel, then clearly it is insoluble by negotiation. There is no compromise between existing and not existing. And at the risk of incurring the wrath of my very good friend, Chief Rabbi Goldstein tonight, I'd only like to say amen to that. Let me just conclude with this. There was a time, and I was, involved in politics, and if I'd only relied on the Jewish vote, I would not have got very far, that the South African Jewish community, organized Jewish community, sometimes tended to resemble what a British historian said of the English equivalent, the trembling Israelites. They said, as we say in the vernacular, jammer dat ek leef. And the only way for us to get along is to go along with whatever the government says. The closer we can get to them, the more successful we are. I think there have been a lot of rude awakenings since then, and there is absolutely nothing to apologize for. The one great gift of South Africa after 1994 is that every South African, regardless of religion, regardless of status, regardless of color, is an equal citizen, invested with inalienable rights, the right to protest, the right to dissent, the right to speech. And I would only say, to borrow the words of a many decades ago Prime Minister of Canada, John Diefenbanker, at the end of the day, have the tremendous privilege and power to say, I tried, I stood, I fought. Thank you very much for this honor.